Hello there. Once again, this is Paul Glumaz, and today is the 4th of September, 2019. It's very good to be with you, and this is being brought to you by General Welfare Presents. Okay, now, the movement that I'm associated with is involved right now in two major mobilizations. And I'll go through what these mobilizations are. The first one is a mobilization that will be going on to the campuses and other locations with a leaflet entitled, the leaflet's entitled, "The Age of Reason is in the Stars." And the first paragraph of it reads, "There is really good news. Man is capable of reason and therefore limitless intellectual and moral perfectibility. We can do something that neither the donkeys nor the monkeys can do. We can discover new scientific principles of the universe in which we live, without limits. And these qualitative discoveries mean that, unlike donkeys and monkeys, we can constantly redefine what resources are, therefore making them unlimited, and that we can continue to improve the livelihoods of humanity." So this is a call, an international call to youth. Now this is very important because what's happening right now is that there's a massive campaign to induct the youth into this green frenzy. And this is the whole Greta Thunberg issue, this is the whole climate change issue, is to get them into this green frenzy. And what we are doing with this leaflet and where we're taking it, we are also combining this with a white paper on documenting what this eco-fascism really is, who's behind it, how it works, and so forth. And so this is a combination. This is a combination of a punch. The good news is that Donald Trump is attacking the eco-fascists and is promoting a space program and isn't buying into the whole eco-fascist agenda. And it's very important that he not do so. So that's the first thing. And we are at the point where we can go into the universities and start this discussion, to start this dialogue on the nature of what a human being is. Because things have come to that point. Things have come to the point where the existing order is disintegrating. And the control over people is a lot less, especially among the young. The young are very open at this point. But they're very open for this eco-fascism as well. But we're going to intervene in a very big way into this, and out of this we hope to recruit a new generation of youth to the ideas of Lyndon LaRouche, to the perspective of Lyndon LaRouche. Now the second mobilization intervention that we're doing is going to be on Congress and the political layers and institutional layers and probably a lot of state legislatures. This is the mobilization to provide the Trump administration with a way out of the financial crisis. Now, we're going into the financial crisis. Negative interest rates means that the system is over. You have the whole situation in Great Britain over the City of London in terms of the Brexit, and I hear the Brexit has now been postponed. Issue has been postponed till January. So, what the point is that there is a real crisis here, and to sustain this financial system, they have to go to negative interest rates, which means the confiscation from the population of their savings. And that's a signal to the end of the system. And the leading banker of the British Empire, the head of the Bank of England, the director of the Financial Stability Board, Mark Carney, is now calling for replacing the dollar with a central bank issued cryptocurrency. And this is a banker's dictatorship, basically. So what is the alternative? And what's going on right now is this escalation of tariffs between China and the U.S. And the whole escalation of tariffs between China and the U.S. is Trump's attempt to change the structure of trade. Now, what happened under the previous system was that the financiers went for the lower wages in the poorer countries. And at one time, China was one of those poorer countries. And the Chinese went along with that, with the idea that every time you put a Western owned factory in the special areas, you bring technology. So why they didn't think the Chinese would steal all the technology or transfer all the technology to themselves, I don't understand what kind of stupid people you have dealing with that. You know, they attack China for intellectual property theft. But what the hell? You're building all these factories and you're building all these centers. And now it's become much more complex, like Apple and a lot of other companies. And so China has amassed this massive manufacturing capability out of this whole process. But they also have gone for the infrastructure. So they're emerging as an industrial power at this moment, second to none. And the U.S. has dismantled a lot. Its basic infrastructure, its basic industrial capability, has not maintained its infrastructure, and the workforce has not been replaced. The skilled workforce is ancient, and you have a situation where you cannot. It's not. You can't just simply relocate the jobs back to the U.S. You can up to a certain point, but you really can't. You don't have the facilities for it. You don't have the skilled labor for it. So it's a real screwed up situation. So the proposal that Paul Gallagher is making, who is one of our key people and economics editor of the Executive Intelligence Review, one of the proposals that he's making is very interesting. He's proposing that China and the U.S. agree to a fixed currency exchange between them. That is, all transactions from the yuan to the dollar and from the dollar to the yuan occur at a fixed ratio, a fixed relationship. But in order for it to work, the dollar needs to be devalued somewhat with respect to the yuan. The yuan needs to be raised up somewhat to the dollar because that's more in keeping with the reality of the relationship between the dollar and the yuan. And what that means is that the U.S. can purchase at a fixed rate stuff from China, and China can purchase stuff from the U.S. at a fixed rate. But what it means is that you're not going to be able you're not going to be able to hold vast sums of funds. It means that China and the U.S. don't have to hold vast sums of funds to deal with the speculators. You now have an ability for direct trade. And in that situation, a trade imbalance is secondary to the fact that you have a fixed exchange. And then at the same time, in the U.S., you have to implement Glass-Steagall. And then you have the commercial banking sector, and then you can start to use long-term credit and so forth. The other thing that a fixed exchange does, it allows for a long-term investment in U.S. development. It also allows for the long-term development because you're not going to be the currency fluctuations aren't going to destroy the profits from the long-term investment, especially in the U.S. So this is very important. And then that fixed exchange between the U.S. and China then becomes the basis for a worldwide fixed exchange system as we go into the collapse, as we go into the crisis. And in that process, it opens the door for a four-power meeting between the U.S., China, Russia, and India in terms of a new system. The British are saying we need a new system, and we're saying we need a new system. Their system is a banker's dictatorship driven by green projects, the finance of green projects. Now, to give you an example of the situation around Brexit, according to some sources, a hard Brexit means that you have to unwind $50 trillion worth of derivatives. That's not a lot of derivatives, but that you have to, when unwinding them could mean other issues. So you have a lot. You have probably a lot more than that. So that's the context in which the situation is that we're in. Now it's very clear that the imperial system of the City of London and all its power, which is accumulated over the world through this financial system and through the various capabilities, intelligence capabilities, and various cultural warfare operations, that power is in deep trouble. And because of the situation in Great Britain, the president of France is starting to shift away from his subservience to the British Empire to a more independent French imperial viewpoint. It's sort of a mix between Napoleon III and de Gaulle. And so he's making overtures to Russia. So the whole Russia thing is disintegrating in Europe. This anti-Russia thing is starting to disintegrate. And he supported bringing Russia in to the G7, making it the G8 that Trump had indicated. However, the Russians said they're really not interested in doing that because you're still leaving out India and China, and you can't really anymore have a conclave of nations meeting to discuss the problems between nations if you don't include China and India. They both have over 1 billion people. They are rising economies. And India will definitely be the most powerful of the two down the line. And I say this because, economically powerful, and I say this because the Chinese got into a neo-Malthusian mentality during the post-Mao period, and they instituted a one-child policy, which they have now abandoned. But it has hurt them because it has limited what they can do in the future. Because one-child policy means you don't have much of a future beyond the horizon of the current generation, and you're going to have to. It's going to be some time lag between now and when you're going to have a bigger Chinese, a larger youth generation. And what makes it worse is people have now accustomed themselves to not having children, having only one child, and it's very hard to break habits. So they're having a hard time getting people to go from having one child to 2 or 3 or 4 children, or 2 children at least. And so the Chinese are going to have to deal with that problem down the line. But the Indians didn't do that. So they have a bulge of young people, coming in who are getting an education, who are getting training, and who will be the backbone of a future industrial transformation of India, which is going to be big. It's going to be huge. The other major part of the world which is going to undergo a tremendous change, and the Chinese are initiating it in part, but they are also not neo-Malthusian in their worldview, and that is African. The entire continent of Africa, mostly, it has, for all its problems, it will have 4 billion people by the end of the century. And that is a horrific idea for the imperial system, to have 4 billion Africans whom they don't think very highly of, and to put it mildly. And these people are starting to catch the excitement of the future, and a lot of the infrastructure that the Chinese are building is helping to set that up. So that's the future that you're looking at, with the space program and the crash fusion program being the driver for the next generation of technologies that will create an incredible potential for humanity to develop. And also, most importantly, you will have the transformation of the sense of identity of the citizens of the earth. Those who are now teenagers, who are younger than teenagers, or a little older than teenagers, are going to have a different identity, you know, which is going to be an identity of beyond the planet, beyond the limitations of our planet. Now, there is a color revolution going on in Hong Kong, and a lot of people are wondering what the hell's going on in Hong Kong. Well, there's been billions and billions of dollars put in, maybe less than that, maybe not as much as Ukraine. It's like the Ukraine. There's been all of the National Endowment for Democracy, the Soros crowd. They've all been preparing for this, and the fertile ground for all of this is the fact that at one point, Hong Kong was more developed than the rest of China. When it came in, it accounted for a large portion of the Chinese GDP, about 27%, in terms of services. Today, Hong Kong only accounts for 3% of the GDP, and it's going down. Well, what happened in Hong Kong is that the restricted land use policy and has created a massive real estate bubble. The real estate bubble in Hong Kong exceeds any part of the world. It's massive. It's absolutely massive. The cost of renting something, is a space the size of your parking space. You have 20% of the population live in sectioned off components of houses, of apartments, where they live in a space the size, more than one person might live in a space the size of the parking lot space, 75 square feet to 100 square feet. And these people cannot afford anything else, and they work hard, and then the young people don't see a future in Hong Kong. There's a brighter future across the way in the mainland, in the communist part. So, but then again, these young people can be targeted for recruitment into into the nostalgia that never existed for the British Empire, which was not a good time for them. But the conditions of Hong Kong, where you have the super billionaires and then the very poor, is not the system that goes on in China. In China, there's been a massive campaign to bring people out of poverty. In Hong Kong, there is no such thing. So this is part of how the conditions exist that lay the groundwork for this. But it's not because of those conditions. It's because of a long-term planned color revolution. And then it's reached a point now where basically today, little Marco Rubio, from Florida, wants us to go into a confrontation with China over Hong Kong. Little Marco, I think Trump had his number, so there's this massive anti-China thing going on among the Republicans. They're resurrecting the yellow pearl. The Chinese yellow pearl that was, that they had during the Korean War and thereafter, and people have to understand that what the U.S. did to North Korea in that war is the most incredible atrocity probably in the history of humanity in terms of a war situation. The U.S. carpet bombed every municipality to the ground. They carpet bombed all the industries. You have to understand, this was between 1948 and 1952. Okay. This means that people my age and a little younger were born in the middle of a carpet bombing operation in North Korea. North Korea has been a garrison state ever since. You have no concept of what was done in North Korea, and the legacy and the memory of that as passed down to the generations is just beyond belief. You know, we hear about the Dresden carpet bombing, fire bombing. This was all of North Korea. So this is why they don't really trust the U.S. I mean, at all. And Trump has made major headlines, and I bring this up because most Americans do not realize the consequences of what we've done in Vietnam and what we did in North Korea in the earlier period. So these people are resurrecting the yellow peril, and you have the FBI beginning the program against Chinese students. And what they're doing is they're targeting Chinese students for recruitment into spying on other Chinese students. And they're creating this environment of suspicion around all of the students from mainland China. Now, I'll tell you right now, there are a lot of students from mainland China in the United States going to school. And the FBI is now starting that whole, process, like they did during the McCarthy period. Like they would bring everybody in from a factory and say, have you known anyone who is a communist? Have you known anyone who is a communist who knows anyone who is a communist? That whole thing, and then you have to give names of people. And this is the kind of thing the FBI is getting going among the Chinese youth, among the Chinese, and this prompted the president of Columbia University to say, we're not going to spy on our Chinese students. But this is the beginning of creating the social basis for a Cold War. So all these students have family in mainland China. They're going to get reports of harassment or of suspensions and so on and so forth. This is the FBI at its most insidious quality of just going in there and creating an environment of fear and paranoia and who's a spy, who's not a spy, and all of that. And I happen to have personal family experience with what the FBI does to political organizations and other institutions in this kind of way. And they started, one of the big things they did during after the third inauguration of Franklin Delano Roosevelt is they started this kind of campaign against Henry Wallace, poisoning the atmosphere politically for Henry Wallace. Is he a communist? Is he a Soviet agent? Is he some kind of freak? Creating all of these, and such that Henry Wallace was not allowed to be the vice presidential candidate for the fourth term. And he would have been the president of the United States. And he was the best thing out there at that time. He was the preferred choice for FDR to succeed him. But FDR was sick, and the FBI created such an onerous environment that Henry Wallace was not allowed to become the president of the United States after FDR died. And that is a big turning point in our history. We got Truman instead, and the British. So the FBI played the key role, and they're playing another key role right now in launching a witch hunt, the beginning of a witch hunt against the Chinese students who are here from China. Now these Chinese students, right? The Chinese attitude towards these students is send them all out there. The ones who want to come back can come back. But mainly it's their parents who are paying for this. It's the parents who are paying. So these are middle-class Chinese parents paying for the education of their kids, getting them to learn English and so forth and so on, and becoming. And it turns out that because of the cultural aspect of the Chinese, which is failure is not an option. Flunking out is not an option. You have essentially a lot of our scientific research establishment is now totally, has all these Chinese in it. Our music schools are dominated by Chinese. There is an issue here, with the fact that the Chinese culture is not, that these people, failure is not an option. So they have a different work ethic, a different thing, different idea. And so we're going to go to war against that. That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense. That's what you want. That's what you need. That's what you should work with. That's where we are.
Common stock investments have helped to make our country prosperous and powerful. Owning a share in American industry is like owning a share in the future of our nation. But remember, John Q., there is a risk as well as an advantage in owning any kind of property. So get the facts before you put your money to work.